Not surprisingly, I spent some time on what I can only describe as moping. I sat sideways on the living room chair, my back resting against one arm, my legs draped over the other. I stared out the window, blankly at first, but gradually I started to notice the people across the way and began watching them going on about their lives. Seeing them completely oblivious to the hell I was in, I think it helped to disassociate myself from my own situation and forget what I was going through for a little while. Also, I've always been something of a people watcher, so I guess continuing that old habit made things feel a bit more normal. Eventually, my eyes wandered to the walls where I'd hung photographs, most of which I'd taken myself. After dabbling in photography for years and having been an art student before that, I had developed a pretty good eye for natural beauty. There was one of South Ashfield Heights I'd taken from the outside. It probably seems odd to have a picture of my apartment building on the wall of my apartment, but I was very attracted to it at first, and I liked the way the picture came out. My love of the place seemed to show through. In the center of the wall adjacent to the windows was a poster-sized photo that was given to me by Frank Sunderland, the superintendent of the building. It was a large panoramic shot of the lake in Silent Hill. It's a nice tourist town, about half a day's drive from Ashfield. It feels a little bit lonely for a tourist town, but it's a nice place to relax and heal your soul. I found myself standing from the chair to get a better look. It was a sort of picture where I noticed something new almost every time I looked. So much to see. There were also two other pictures on the other side of the corner, next to the windows. These I had taken. One was during the summer and the other was in the winter. I'd managed to get nearly the same shot during 2 different times of the year, and they looked interesting together, one hanging above the other, with their similarities and differences playing off each other. My eyes wandered to the other side of the apartment. Something at the door caught my eye and snapped me out of my reverie. 2 pieces of paper had been slipped underneath it at some point. I went to the door, picked up the smaller one, and opened it to see a child's writing. "Mom, why doesn't you wake up?" I looked out the peephole to see if perhaps the person who left the note was still there. I saw no one, but I did see a fresh bloody handprint on the wall next to the older ones. I tensed and felt my stomach tighten. Time to look at the other note. This one had been printed on reddish paper. "Although the cult itself is gone, I'm sure the spirit of it is still alive. There are too many strange things happening in that town. I'm investigating 2 people, or maybe I should say just one. I've just about discovered what's going on. April 8th. Was all I could really say. The passage looked like only part of a longer article of some kind, and it probably made more sense in context. This reminded me of a passage from the first note I found, behind the bookcase, so I retrieved that. It was still on the floor where I dropped it earlier when I was startled by the huge bang that came from the bathroom, and gave it another look. It exists in a space separate from the world of our Lord. More accurately, it is within yet without the Lord's world. These messages were not as random as they seemed. Someone was leaving me clues. What I thought was South Ashfield Station wasn't the station itself, but an alternate version of it? And who could be leaving me these notes anyway? I could almost see a puzzle beginning to form, but I didn't have anywhere near enough pieces to make a recognizable image yet. I took the 3 notes and put them in a folder that was on my desk in the bedroom. I had a feeling they'd come in handy later, once I had more of the pieces. I also decided that it was time to try going through the hole again. I didn't relish the idea of going back to the subway station, but I wasn't even sure if the hole would still lead me there. He who carries too heavy a burden will regret it. Good idea, I muttered, not considering the implications of having conversations with book passages. There was a big chest in the living room, right by the hallway. I'd barely used it since I moved in, so I knew it'd be perfect for keeping important items in. I retrieved the Temptation placard and placed it in there. I didn't really take it with me so much as it appeared next to me on the bed when I returned from the subway station, as if I was meant to take it, along with the subway tokens. I picked up the pipe and went into the bathroom to find that the hole had gotten bigger and rounder. I wondered what else had changed. With the gun still with me and the pipe in my hand, I crawled through the hole to find out. When I opened my eyes, I was nearly blinded by a streetlight. I sat up and looked around to discover that it couldn't have been a streetlight because I was in the middle of a dark forest, surrounded only by grass and trees. I stood up and got my bearings, realizing that I was at the beginning of a path made only of dry, cracked dirt, which was lined with lampposts. There was a gate up ahead, so I went through it. Shortly, I came upon an industrial-looking building made of concrete with double doors made of metal. On either side was a sign that declared, "Danger, do not enter." I paused and looked around a bit before entering anyway, as there was nowhere else to go. Once inside, I was on a declining steel ramp with a chain-link fence on either side. My only guess was that this was a factory or a warehouse of some kind. I continued down the path and down another ramp. I flinched with a shriek when I heard a loud buzz and felt something whiz past the side of my head, startling me. Something big. I looked around frantically. At first I couldn't see anything in the darkness. Then suddenly I spotted something that looked like a giant black moth. Whatever it was coming right at me. I managed to swing the pipe at just the right time and angle to knock it to the ground. I looked at it, and my eyes widened when I realized that it wasn't quite a moth. More than anything, it looked like a bat, although still bug-like in a way, as it had a long, thin, vicious-looking beak-like protrusion that reminded me of a mosquito. It twitched on the ground, moving about as it struggled in vain pathetically. My stomach turned as I realized what I had to do. I raised my foot and slammed it down on the creature, crushing it. Normally I'm not particularly squeamish about killing bugs, but this thing was nearly as big as my boot. Not to mention that as I killed it, blood pooled beneath it. Not the random-looking fluids you would normally see coming out of insects, but actual red blood. Perhaps it was more like a bat after all. I quickly wiped the bottom of my boot on the floor afterwards. Not wanting to contemplate this any further, I hurried along to the next gate and went through it. In the next area were gigantic vats filled with some kind of foul-smelling liquid. What it was and what it was used for was anyone's guess, but luckily, and inexplicably, I found a box of ammo for my gun, so I picked it up and pocketed it. Through the next gate was where the concrete ended, and I was outdoors once again. One more gate and I was back on a dirt path. In front of me was a yellow car. It looked like a '78 Chevy Nova, but it was too dark to be able to tell for sure. The engine was running with the driver's side door open. As I approached, I noticed that the brake pedal was engaged and there was junk scattered all over the seat, including a piece of paper with writing on it, which I read. "It's been a while since I came here to Silent Hill. Maybe I'll meet the devil this time. Signed, Jasper Gine." At least I knew roughly where I was now, Silent Hill. There was also a memo pad. I'm not sure what that nosy guy meant when he said his home is the orphanage in the middle, the lake is northwest, so opposite is southeast. The nosy guy said one other thing I don't understand. If you bring the dug-up key, you can't go back. Put it away somewhere before you return there. I didn't take any of the papers with me as the owner of the car might be nearby, but I made it a point to memorize them in case I'd need the info later. Before leaving the car and going through the next gate. Even before going through the gate, I saw 2 rocks. Each was the size of a tall building, and as I stepped away from the gate, they were at either side of me. Their shape wasn't quite natural, so I wondered if they'd been carved somehow. They also had many scratches and grooves along with circular hollows cut into them. They were obviously very old. I felt a mild shiver run through me. Their sheer size itself was intimidating, but there was something else, as if I could sense an ominous presence. Between the rocks and along the path I was on was a wooden fence bearing dozens of lit candles. Sitting with his back against the rock on my right was what I thought was a scrawny teenager, staring blankly at the candles. He wore jeans, red tennis shoes, and a dark green t-shirt with some kind of winged demon on it. It reminded me of those heavy metal shirts the kids wore in the 80s. He also had one of those hairstyles where it's shaved everywhere but the very top. No slave to fashion, to be sure. Not that I had much room to talk. As I approached, one look at his face told me that he was much older than I thought, at least in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. So you came to investigate this stone too, he said. I shrugged. There was another guy here before, a real nosy guy, but I was the one who found this stone first. The nosy guy. I guess that'd make you Jasper Gine, I thought, remembering the papers I'd just read. In the old days, the natives called it Nakihona. They used it in a ceremony for talking with their dead ancestors. And now, those guys are using it too. He gestured in the direction where the path continued. I looked at the obscene numbers of candles decorating the fence and wondered if it was they who lit those candles, or Jasper. Call it the Mother Stone, he continued. They're just up ahead in that weird building, operating some kind of crazy religious cult. That got my attention. The confusing memo I found under my door said something about a religious cult. Although the cult itself is gone, I'm sure the spirit of it is still alive. There are too many strange things happening in that town. That they used to collect orphans and did things to them. Did things? I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Kinda gives you the chills, huh? This stone. Yeah, gives me the chills. The stones weren't the only things giving me the chills, as he put it. This guy had kind of fidgety body language and a haunted look about him that was a little off-putting. I'll be honest, he gave me the creeps, and I pretty much decided right away that I'd spend as little time around him as possible. I could tell he cared more about hearing himself talk than carrying on an actual conversation, so I walked away without a word, figuring he'd barely notice. As I did, I heard him muttering to himself, "A ceremony for talking with the dead."